On the morning of December 21st, 2025, just 4 days before Christmas, a 911 call came into Edison, New Jersey police at 9:18 a.m. Someone had been stabbed. When officers arrived at the residence on Grove Avenue, they found 25-year-old Imani Diaz-Smith with multiple stab wounds. She was rushed to Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital in New Brunswick, where she was pronounced dead. Her boyfriend, 35-year-old Jordan D. Jackson Small, was arrested 2 days later and charged with first-degree murder, second-degree endangering the welfare of a child, third-degree possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose, and fourth-degree unlawful possession of a weapon. Imani left behind a 3-year-old son, her parents Monique Rance Helper and Ronnie Helper, and 2 younger siblings. For those who don't know Broadway or The Lion King, Imani Diaz-Smith wasn't a household name, but she had been part of something massive. From September 27, 2011 to September 23, 2012, when she was just a child herself, Imani played young Nala in Disney's The Lion King on Broadway. The production has been running since 1997 and is one of the longest-running shows in Broadway history. Playing young Nala meant performing 8 shows a week in front of hundreds of people, singing, dancing, acting. Her aunt Kira Helper described her as a true triple threat performer, someone who could sing, act, and dance at the highest level. Think about what it takes for a child to perform on Broadway. The audition process alone is brutal. Hundreds of kids audition for these roles, and the ones who make it have to balance school, rehearsals, and 8 performances a week. They work under Broadway's strict child labor laws, which limit their hours and require tutors on site. And through all of that, Imani shined. She captured audiences night after night in one of the most iconic roles in musical theater. But Imani came from a family that understood the business. Her mother, Monique Rance Helper, is a prominent Broadway and television hairstylist. According to her IMDb page, Monique has worked on over 25 productions since 2010. She styled hair and wigs for The Lion King on Broadway, the same show where her daughter performed. She worked on the In the Heights film, the FX series Pose, and Broadway productions including Eclipsed, Once on This Island, and The Lightning Thief. In 2022, she worked on the horror film Smile, and in 2025, she worked on The Housemaid. Monique was a freelance artist, which meant irregular income and no guaranteed salary, but she had built a respected career in an incredibly competitive industry. After Imani's time on Broadway ended in 2012, the public record goes quiet about her career. She was a child performer who had a moment in the spotlight, and then, like so many child actors, moved on with her life. What we know is that by 2025, Imani was 25 years old, she had a 3-year-old son, and she was in a relationship with Jordan D. Jackson Small. According to the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office, Smith and Jackson Small knew each other before the incident, meaning this wasn't a random act of violence. Her aunt's GoFundMe page goes further, stating plainly that Imani was killed by her boyfriend. Court records paint a concerning picture of Jackson Small's history. According to multiple reports, Jackson Small pleaded guilty in June 2024 to an aggravated assault charge related to a domestic incident that occurred on December 21st, 2023. That's exactly 1 year to the day before Imani was killed. Following his guilty plea, Jackson Small was accepted into a pretrial intervention program, which is typically offered to first-time offenders as an alternative to prosecution. The program usually involves counseling, community service, and supervision, and if completed successfully, the charges can be dismissed. But less than 6 months after entering that program, Imani Diaz-Smith was dead. Think about that timeline. December 21st, 2023, an aggravated assault charge stemming from a domestic incident. June 2024, guilty plea and acceptance into an intervention program designed to prevent future violence. December 21st, 2024, Imani was killed. The system put in place to prevent exactly this kind of outcome failed. New Jersey has been grappling with a domestic violence crisis. According to state data, reported domestic violence incidents jumped nearly 15% between 2015 and 2023, from 61,659 incidents to 70,228. In 2023 alone, there were 57 domestic violence-related homicides in New Jersey, a 46% increase from 2019. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. And in New Jersey, the state hotline is 1-800-572-7233. Every county in New Jersey has a domestic violence agency, but knowing those numbers doesn't answer why Imani didn't call one of those hotlines, or if she did call, why it didn't save her life. Nicole Morella, co-executive director at the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence, has pointed to New Jersey's housing shortage as one reason victims stay in dangerous relationships. They don't have anywhere else to go. Affordable housing is scarce, and survivors find themselves either staying longer in abusive situations or having to return because there aren't permanent housing options available. The night before Imani died, she was doing something that tells you exactly who she was. She had picked up 17 Santa letters from Staples, letters meant for families in need, and that night she spent time addressing all of them. She told her mother, Kathy Grossu, who appears to be her maternal grandmother based on context, that she wanted to get them in the mail before getting on a plane the next day. Kathy picked up the last letters from Staples, brought them to the house, and Imani put them in envelopes that night. That was the last thing she did before what should have been a trip, before her life ended the next morning. Imani Dia-Smith, at 25 years old with a 3-year-old son at home, was spending her time making sure families in need would get Christmas letters. That detail matters because it shows you who she was when nobody was watching. After the killing, Imani's aunt Kira Helper set up a GoFundMe to support Imani's parents, who are now grieving their daughter while suddenly responsible for raising their grandson and supporting their 2 other children through this trauma. The fundraising goal was set at $50,000, and the description explains where the money will go. Funeral and memorial expenses. Crime scene cleanup at Imani's home, because when someone is murdered in a residence, the family is responsible for cleaning up the aftermath. Trauma therapy for Imani's son, her siblings, and her parents. Time off from work for Monique and Ronnie to grieve, provide care and attend legal proceedings. Legal and administrative costs related to the criminal case. Ongoing support and care for Imani's son. Care for Imani's beloved dog, Kuro. As of December 24th, the GoFundMe has raised over $48,000, exceeding the initial goal. Among the donors reportedly was Judy Kuhn, the Broadway actress who provided the singing voice for Pocahontas in Disney's 1995 animated film. The entertainment community was rallying around one of their own. The description written by Kira Helper explains the reality facing Monique and Ronnie. Monique works as a Broadway and television and film hairdresser, and like so many in freelance and artistic fields, time away from work means lost income during an already devastating period. They're trying to hold their family together while comforting their children, navigating the sudden responsibility of raising their grandson, and finding a way forward while their world has been shattered. The charges against Jordan D. Jackson Small are severe. First-degree murder in New Jersey carries a sentence of 30 years to life in prison. The second-degree endangering the welfare of a child charge suggests something happened in the presence of or involving a child, possibly Imani's 3-year-old son. Third-degree possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose, and fourth-degree unlawful possession of a weapon are the weapons charges. As of December 25th, Jackson Small is being held at the Middlesex County Adult Correctional Center in North Brunswick, New Jersey, pending a pre-trial detention hearing. The Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office has stated that Smith and Jackson Small knew each other prior to the incident, and therefore it was not a random act of violence. They've also stated that the charges are allegations and that Jackson Small is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The investigation is ongoing, conducted by detectives from the Edison Police Department and the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office. The Broadway community has been mourning publicly. Playbill, the premier publication for theater news, published Imani's death prominently. Broadway World, another major theater publication, covered the story with the headline that she had died at 25. Theater Mania, Variety, Deadline, The Hollywood Reporter, and TMZ all reported on her death. For someone whose Broadway career lasted 1 year when she was a child, The outpouring shows how deeply the theater community takes care of its own. But beyond the industry response, what stands out in every article, every social media post, every comment is the word senseless. Kira Helper used that word in the GoFundMe description, saying Imani was senselessly killed. It's a word people use when there's no explanation that makes sense, when a life is taken for no reason that a rational person can understand. Domestic violence homicides are the opposite of senseless in one way. They follow patterns. They escalate. There are warning signs. There's often a history. Jackson Small's 2023 aggravated assault charge and domestic incident wasn't random. It was a warning sign, and the system tried to intervene with a pre-trial intervention program. But intervention programs only work if the person completes them, if they genuinely address the underlying issues, if there's adequate supervision and follow-up. Imani's death raises questions about whether that supervision was adequate, whether the warning signs were taken seriously enough, whether more could have been done. Those questions don't have easy answers, and they're not questions for Imani's family to answer. They're questions for the system. The Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office said in their press release that anyone with information relevant to the investigation should contact Detective Sergeant Timothy McGurk of the Edison Police Department or Detective Zachary Pena of the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office. As of Christmas Day 2025, the investigation is active and ongoing. What happened in that residence on Grove Avenue in Edison, New Jersey, on the morning of December 21st, will eventually be laid out in court documents, in trial testimony, in evidence presented to a jury. We'll learn the details of what led to Imani's death, the sequence of events, the timeline. But those details, as important as they are for the legal case, won't answer the deeper question of why. Why did Jordan Jackson Small allegedly kill Imani? What was happening in that relationship? What led to this moment? And most importantly, what could have been done differently to prevent it? Imani's aunt wrote in the GoFundMe that Imani had her whole life ahead of her, that she was vivacious, loving, and fiercely talented. She wrote that Imani's role as young Nala on Broadway reflected the joy, creativity, and light she put into the world. Those words matter because they center Imani's humanity, not just the circumstances of her death. It's easy for a story like this to become about the crime, about the charges, about the investigation. But Imani Dia Smith was a person who lived 25 years, who performed on Broadway as a child, who grew up in a family connected to the arts, who had a 3-year-old son she was raising, who spent her final night addressing Christmas letters for families in need. That's who she was. Think about her son, who is 3 years old right now, old enough to remember his mother, old enough to know something terrible happened, but too young to fully understand it. He's going to grow up with his grandparents Monique and Ronnie, with his aunt and uncles, with a family that loved his mother and will make sure he knows who she was. He'll grow up knowing his mother performed on Broadway, that she brought joy to audiences, that she was talented and loving and vivacious. But he'll also grow up knowing how she died, and that's a burden no child should have to carry. The family's GoFundMe mentions care for Imani's beloved dog, Kuro. That detail might seem small compared to everything else, but it shows the complete destruction that a murder causes to a family. Suddenly they're responsible for a 3-year-old child, for planning a funeral, for cleaning a crime scene, for paying legal fees, for therapy bills, for managing trauma, and yes, for taking care of a pet that Imani loved. Every single aspect of their lives has been upended. The Lion King, the show where Imani performed, is about family, about loss, about a circle of life. In the musical, young Nala is Simba's childhood friend, the character who eventually brings him home, who reminds him of who he is. Imani played that role hundreds of times, singing "I Just Can't Wait to Be King," and other songs, performing in front of packed audiences at the Minskoff Theater in New York City. She was part of something that brought joy to thousands of people. And now, 13 years after her time in that show ended, she's gone. New Jersey lawmakers are currently working on multiple bills to address the state's domestic violence crisis. One proposal would require domestic violence public awareness campaigns to go beyond physical violence and address emotional and financial abuse. Another bill is seeking to expand the definition of domestic violence under state law. Another aims to increase penalties for violators. There's also a push to allow prosecutors to introduce evidence of prior domestic violence in trials, similar to laws that exist in California, Alaska, Illinois, Louisiana, Texas, and Wisconsin. Patricia Teffenhart, Executive Director of the Attorney General's Office's Violence Intervention and Victim Assistance Division, testified in support of these changes, noting that domestic violence accounts for a significant portion of law enforcement responses in New Jersey. But laws and programs and interventions only work if they're implemented effectively, if there's adequate funding, if there's follow-through. Imani Diaz-Smith's death suggests that somewhere in the system, something failed. Jordan Jackson Small was in a pre-trial intervention program after pleading guilty to an aggravated assault charge related to a domestic incident. The program was supposed to prevent future violence. 6 months later, Imani was dead. That's not a failure of the concept of intervention programs. It's a failure of implementation, of supervision, of taking warning signs seriously enough. And it's a failure that cost Imani her life. The Broadway community has been sharing memories and tributes to Imani on social media. The specifics of those tributes are harder to find in the immediate aftermath, as most of the coverage has focused on the facts of the case. But the GoFundMe and the articles make clear that Imani was loved, that she was remembered, that her death has left a hole in the community. What stands out in this story is the contrast between who Imani was and how she died. She spent her final night addressing Christmas letters for families in need. She was a mother to a 3-year-old son. She came from a family deeply embedded in the arts, with a mother who worked on some of the biggest productions in television and theater. She had performed on Broadway at a young age, an accomplishment that requires immense talent and discipline. And she died at 25, allegedly killed by her boyfriend, in a residence in Edison, New Jersey 4 days before Christmas, leaving behind a young son who will grow up without his mother. There's no way to make sense of that. There's no silver lining, no lesson that makes it okay, no perspective that makes it less tragic. The investigation will continue. Jordan Jackson Small will face trial. The legal system will determine his guilt or innocence. Imani's family will grieve, will raise her son, will try to move forward while carrying the weight of this loss. The Broadway community will remember her, and hopefully policymakers and advocates will look at Imani's death as one more reason why New Jersey's domestic violence prevention and intervention systems need to be strengthened, why warning signs need to be taken more seriously, why funding and resources for victims and survivors need to be increased. But none of that brings Imani back. None of that gives her son his mother back. None of that undoes what happened on that December morning. What we're left with is the record of a life cut short. A Broadway performer who brought joy to audiences. A mother who loved her 3-year-old son. A daughter whose parents are now raising her child. A woman who spent her final night doing something kind for strangers. That's who Imani Diaz-Smith was. That's who we lost on December 21st, 2025. Rest in peace to Imani Diaz-Smith, 25 years old. A life ended too soon, but not a life lived without meaning.